Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Thursday class with some prayers first. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha, Om Bhurбhavасваha, Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Asto ma sadgamya, tamso ma jyotirgamya, mrityurma amritam gamya. Om Sena Bhavtu Sena Bhunaktu Saviryam Karvavai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidveshavai. Om Shanti 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 Om. So we have started looking into the Mundak Upanishad. And I was telling you last week that this is a conversation between Rishi Angirasa, who is the guru, and Shaunaka. Later on, he became a Rishi too. So ultimately, the students also reached to that level. How? By spending some time with the guru and by practicing what guru teaches. So Shaunaka. So in this scripture, he's just a student, Shaunaka, and Rishi Angirasa. So we'll start today's class with verse number 4. Tasmai saha uvacha dve vidye viditve iti hasma yad brahmavida vadanti paracha eva aparacha. Tasmai, to him. Sa means he. He means the guru over here, the Angiras, Rishi Angiras. Ha uvacha, said. Dve means two, vidya, knowledges, viditve, to be acquired. Iti means that. Hasma yad, that means which. Brahma vida, those who know Brahma. Vadanti, say, para, higher. Cha means and. Ev means also. Aparaha, lower. Cha means and. So to him, and that means the student, Shaunaka, Rishi Angiras said, there are two kinds of knowledges to be acquired, namely apara and para, lower and higher. So say those who know Brahma, Brahma Vida. So he is not saying that this is my idea. He says those great sages of the Upanishads who know this, they say that there are two knowledges. I'm sure you remember the question which was asked by the student. So never forget the question also, because remembering the question, then we can see that how beautifully the Guru is answering. Question was, what is that, my Lord, which being known, all these become known? That was the question. So this question is regarding the supreme knowledge. And to this, the answer given is supremely evasive in this verse. So even though the disciple is asking, what is it? Guru knows that there is a depth in this question also. And he wants to make sure that his mind is also going into the depth to understand the answer. That's why his answer is starting out with an elaborate way. Because it's the duty of the Guru to guide the disciples. That's what Gurus do. They always, the Gurus, they see where their students are at. And they also know that wherever they are, from there, it's my duty to take them to the higher level. So in the most scientific way, Rishi Angiras starts his discourse with the classification of the entire possibility of knowledge. He says the knowledge possibilities fall into two distinct groups, the lower and the higher. The terrestrial and the transcendental. So the question of the disciple is about the transcendental, actually. And it is a very intelligent way. The teacher is negating that which it's not, and then he will assert of what is. The negation itself is an indirect pointer to the path, which leads to that which is to be asserted. So that's why he's mentioning the lower as well as the higher. Because the question is concealing in its words the thirst to know what that supreme knowledge is. But at the same time, it shows the doubt in the mind of the student whether there can be such a knowledge. So the import of the question is there a knowledge, O teacher, knowing which all of the knowledges become known? And if there be such a knowledge, in what way is it different from the ordinary knowledges which are known to us? And it also is implying that how can I attain this? We should have that kind of a mind also, that kind of a thirst in our minds when we study the Upanishads. And another thing we see in these Upanishads, in the presence of the Guru, the disciple dared not talk too much. Questions are always very small. What he had to say, he said in the minimum number of words. Almost you can say that half of what he wanted to say was unsaid. It's like a suggestive expression. But it was definitely readable by that kind and intelligent Guru. Because Gurus are to that level, Guru can really read our minds too. Then in the next verse, Tatra apraha rigveda yajurveda samveda atharvaveda shiksha kalpaha vyakaranam nirukta chandaha jyotisham iti athpara yaya tat aksharam adhigamyate. Tatra means there, apara, lower knowledge. Rigved, Yajurved, Samved, Atharvaved. So these are the names of those four Vedas. Shiksha, phonetics. Kalpaha, code of rituals. Vyakaranam, grammar. Nirukta, etymology. Chand, meter. Jyotisham, astrology. Iti means that. Ath means now. Para, the higher knowledge. Yaya, by which. Tat means that. Aksharam. Akshar is something which doesn't perish. That which is beyond the word meaning in the languages. Immortality, you can call it. Adhigamyate, leads. There, the lower knowledge is constituted of the four Vedas. Rig Ved, Samved, Yajur Ved, and the Atharva Ved. And the 6 Vedangs: Shiksha, code of rituals, grammar, etymology, meter, astrology. Now the higher knowledge, that which leads to immortality, akshara, or that which goes beyond the word meaning in languages. So in the previous verse, scientifically, he divided the knowledge into two groups. Now this great Rishi is continuing his scheme of teaching by clearly describing the scope and content of the lower knowledge first. So he is saying that 4 Vedas and 6 Vedangs. Vedangs are the branches of knowledge that are complementary information, unavoidable in all attempts at a fuller appreciation of the Vedas. So they all belong to the category of lower knowledge. So this great Shaunaka faithfully believed in the Vedic declarations. It's not that he did not study those Vedas. So his entire life, he followed strictly the ritualistic portion of that immortal religion. But the end of his lifetime, when he reached the feet of a master seeking the supreme, he was told that he had squandered away the best part of his life into the lower knowledge. You can imagine that this information must have been a dreadful shock to him. All my life I've been studying that, which was lower. So the master must have noticed. So he is comforting his disciple by saying that the supreme knowledge is that which transcends the word meaning of the Vedas. And that which is dealt with after the chapters describing the ritualism. You remember the first portion of the Vedas is what? Karmakand, ritualism. Supreme knowledge is that which directly deals with the state of immortality. So this beautiful word which this Rishi is using, akshara, we know that that means there's no destruction. Akshara, immortal. Akshar also means the alphabet. So the contents of the Paravidya are that knowledge which leads the pursuer to a rediscovery of his own true nature. And own true nature is nothing but the immortal selfhood. And this branch of knowledge lies beyond the worlds. So those lower is not useless. Lower is to walk upon towards the higher. Can we say that lower steps on the stairs are useless? We need to walk on the lower steps in order to reach to the higher. But if we think that we have been walking on the lower and that is it, that is not enough. Even in the ladder of yoga, the Ashtanga yoga, the lower steps are what? Yam, Niyam, Asan, Pranayam, Pratyahar. Those are the lower steps. But if somebody thinks that, no, I got to do only asanas and the pranayams, I'm a yogi, that's not correct. But if somebody says, no, I don't want to do that, I want to just sit in the meditation and go into the ultimate samadhi, cannot do that either. Lower, they have their place. Okay, that preparation is needed. If you want to make a good food, we got to have the groceries, all the ingredients. We got to know how to make a meal, how to then finally have the final preparation also, and what to do with it too. So all of that is needed. But to remember, lower is lower, and do not stop at the level of the lower. It's almost like studying the scriptures. Or if Guru tells us that don't tell a lie, don't hurt anybody, don't cheat anybody. Ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. We have memorized it, but in our behavior, we don't bring those qualities. So we have not reached the higher. Sure, we have done the lower. We know the terminology. We can reiterate beautifully. But can we live those values or not? The same thing over here. So he says there is a apara and there's a para. Okay? And apara, we get it from those great books, Vedas and Vedangas also. Then in next verse he says, Yat tat adreshyam agrahyam agotram avarnam achakshu shrotram tat apani padam nityam vibhu sarvgatam susuksham tat avyam yat bhut yoni paripashyanti dhiraha. Yat tat, yat means which, tat means that. Adreshyam, invisible. Agrahyam, ungraspable. Agotram, unoriginated. Avarnam, attributeless. Achakshuhu shrotram, that which has neither eyes nor ears. That means that. Panipad, which has neither hands nor legs. Pani means hands. Pad means the legs of the feet. Pad. Nityam, eternal. Vibhu, full of manifestation. Saravgatam, all pervading. Susuksham. See, suksham is subtle. Susuksham means subtlest of the subtle. That means that avyayam, imperishable being. Yad means which, bhut yoni, source of all creation. Paripashyanti, perceive. Dhiraha, the wise. So Guru is saying that which is invisible, ungraspable, unoriginated, and attributeless. That which has neither eyes nor ears, nor hands nor legs. That is eternal. Full of manifestations, all pervading, subtlest of the subtle. That imperishable being which the wise perceived as the source of all creation. This verse is a perfect definition of that which is indefinable. There's no Shastra in our literature where this mantra has not been referred or quoted. So after describing the contents of the lower knowledge, apara knowledge, the Rishi in his infinite kindness is making a daring attempt to explain and express the infinite. But still in the terms of finite, because we cannot understand infinite as such. So naturally, we who are accustomed to transactions in the finite world, we find it difficult to comprehend and grasp the full import of the expressions used. That's why let's look at it phrase by phrase to really understand the secret of this verse. It's almost like a treasure house of the Vedic wealth, so beautifully concealed behind these expressions. Invisible. Supreme reality is invisible. Why? Because what is visible should be an object of seeing. A tree, a branch, a fruit, any relative, anything else. But we are seeking the central life force within ourselves, which is the very seer in us. We are making use of the instrument of vision, the eyes, the seer, is looking out to see the seen. With the same instrument of vision, the seer cannot see himself. Just like eyes can see everything else, but eyes cannot see themselves. Somebody might say, no, we can see our eyes in the mirror. You are only looking at the reflection. You're not looking at the eyes. It's like with a telescope, we can observe the moon, but with the same instrument, the observer cannot observe himself. Because when the observer becomes the object, where is the observer? At the eyepiece of the telescope. So never it is possible in life to make the subject and the object function together at one and the same place. It's almost like no matter how tired you may be, you cannot ride on your own shoulders. So you may see everything with the eyes, but with your own eyes, you can never hope to see one thing with your own eyes. So that's why a seeker who's seeking the subject cannot see the subject. Because if he sees, it would be only the seen. That is the object. So that's why this Rishi is saying the life spark, whether it's a Atma or Paramatma, it's invisible. You cannot see it because it's not an object. Then he says, ungraspable, agrahyam. Somebody might say that, oh, okay, all right, I cannot see him, but maybe my mind can grasp it. Because mind is definitely subtler than the sense organs. Maybe I can grasp it by my mind because my mind is so sharp. I've been working on my mind. So this is what is negated by this Guru in this Shruti. Agrahyam. Mind cannot conceive the truth. Because the capacity to conceive the truth is lent to the mind by the very life force, Atma. So if you're trying to understand or conceive the Atma with the help of the mind, how can you do that? There's a good example. Maybe you can understand that a driver at the steering wheel, while driving, cannot be run over by the... He cannot say that I'm going to sit over here and then go in front of the car and get run over. Because the moment the driver leaves his seat, rushes to the front of the car, it stops. It has no motion. So the Atma, the dynamic power behind the mind that vitalizes the mind, that makes it possible for the mind to grasp things, cannot be grasped independently by the mind. Should the mind grasp the reality, it should stand apart from the object it so grasps. And the moment the mind divorces itself from its connection with the Atma, it becomes dead, inert, cannot grasp anything anyway without the power of the Atma. So that's why it said that the Supreme is ungraspable. Then the next term he used, agotram, unoriginated. Everything created or formed must perish or die away because that was a beginning. And anything which has a beginning must have an end. But the eternal or the immortal, which has no end, if there's no end to it, by definition, there's no beginning to it either. So that's what agotram means, unoriginated. You cannot say that Atma was born on a certain day, or God was born that day. Then attributeless. Attributes are properties, chemical or physical, noticed by the sense organs, or felt by the mind, or deduced by the intellect. So in other words, attributes can only be in the objects illumined by the subject. So a substance or a thing is that which has some attributes. Wherever there are attributes, objects are there too. So the world of substance is finite. Then the eternal, changeless reality could have no attributes. Because to consider the Supreme as having attributes is to condemn it to extinction. The next thing he says in this verse, achakshu shrotram, neither eyes nor ears. Then he says, apani padam, nor hands nor legs. So we have been told the Supreme is not visible to us. We may jump to the conclusion that we cannot see it. It may be seeing us. This is what's denied over here. The Supreme has neither the organs of knowledge nor the organs of action. The eyes and the ears, the hands and the legs are vehicles which can function only in him who needs. He doesn't have those because he doesn't need these instruments. He can see without eyes. He can hear without ears. He doesn't need these instruments for his own existence. See, this physical body of ours need all this. Atma doesn't need it. The all-pervading needs no instruments to recognize itself. Because there are no objects in him other than himself. There's no ignorance in him to be discovered with some knowledge. Doesn't need to gain any new knowledge. Because his knowledge itself. And again, the action is not possible for the all-pervading. Because when you are already filling up the entire space in a given chair, there is no going or coming for you in that very same chair. And God is everywhere. Every inch of space is filled by Him. That's why we call it Paripurna. So the pure consciousness, which is all pervading, feels no necessity to act or to move. And the action is generally nothing but an expression at the fulfillment of a desire. So the Paripurna reality in its own all full nature can desire nothing. So there's no action possible in it. Then he uses the word nityam, eternal. That which is unoriginated must be eternal. That which is eternal must be all-pervading. And if it is all-pervading, then the entire world of matter must be, in a sense, nothing but its own manifestation. And all pervasiveness indicates a state of the highest subtlety. See, just like we have a bowl of water, it is only in that bowl. But when we spill it, it just goes to a larger space. But when we boil it and make it into the steam, it's more pervasive. Okay? So such a stuff should necessarily be imperishable. You cannot perish it. So when Rishi Angiras defined the Supreme with all these terms, and supra-mental definition, actually, you can call it, surely the Shaunak, the disciple, must have got more than confused. And there must be expression on that student's face as a disbelief and a confession of his own sense of hopelessness. Guru must have seen. So to reassure his disciple, he's saying that eternal factor is realizable by every trained and prepared intellect. So this Rishi is explaining very positively that every pure intellect can be made sensitive for the purpose and discover this reality. And this is what this term over here, paripashyanti. Pashyanti could be that you are just looking at something. But paripashyanti means it's not just a hasty glance, but a thorough, intimate, personal, subjective experience of this truth. In all details, every part of the whole. So, with this discovery, this mantra states, the discoverer discovers the Supreme as the source of all the finite world of names and forms. Bhut yoni paripashyanti dhira. You got to be wise. You have to be dheer. Bhut yoni. Bhut yoni means as the womb of matter. Every effect has a cause. There is no effect possible without a cause. And causation hunting is the very function of the intellect. Where there's no cause-effect relationship, the intellect just stops then. It just becomes a little denser. So a disciple who is in the plane of the intellect, a teacher must talk in terms of the student's own language, the language of causation. So the scripture here says that the ultimate cause for all the world of perishable and changing names and forms is that eternal factor which has been defined in this mantra. So eternal is the source of the finite. In a way, he is just making sure that the student understands. It's almost like the delusory serpent comes from the rope, or the ghost comes from the post, and all the parts come out of the clay. So we have been guided that, or he's telling us that there never was a finite world except in the brain and the intellect of you and me. Because there's it's not a snake. We only imagine that there was a snake. So the Supreme alone supremely exists, all alone. When we say that that alone exists, which is at once the center of the whole and of the part. So these names and forms which we see, which we visualize, they are nothing but the Supreme. That's what he's trying to tell us. So let me read this translation again to you, just to make sure that we have touched upon every part of it. That which is invisible, ungraspable, unoriginated, and attributeless. That which has neither eyes, nor ears, nor hands, nor legs. That is eternal. Full of manifestations. So manifestations are there, but they are manifestations. All pervading, subtlest of the subtle, that imperishable being which the wise perceived as the source of all creation. So everything has come out of him. In the next verse, next week, we'll see Rishi is giving three beautiful examples. Example of a spider, example of a plant sprouting out of the earth, and an example of a hair growing on the head. And we'll see what these three beautiful examples, how they take us towards understanding God, the supreme reality. Okay? So do not forget the question which is being asked by the student, because teacher is just going into the detail, into the depth, just to answer his question. Simple looking question, but a pretty deep question actually. And that should be a question for all of us, the serious students. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.